I'm Mike Boris, and this is Straight Talk.
Daniel Mookhey. How you going, mate? Welcome.
Thank you for having me on. It's such an honour.
This is cool. This is really cool. I don't know any podcasts have actually have gone around interviewing. I certainly haven't. State treasurers. I've definitely interviewed federal treasurers, mostly in the Liberal camp. In fact, 100% in the Liberal camp. But hopefully I'll get. No, I have had Jim on here. Jim has been here. I should say. Jim was there during the election period. And it was very good. It was very interesting. I think it's important for us New South Welshmen and the rest of the country, for that matter, who listen to this, to know a little bit about who's running the money part of the business. Who's our CFO?
Yeah.
And that's you.
That is me from the New South Wales government. Yeah,
totally you. And you've just launched a budget. We'll just talk about the budget shortly. But let's do something you're probably not used to. Let's talk a little bit about who Daniel Mookhey is. So your surname, Mookhey.
Mookhey. Mookhey as in cookie.
Mookhey as in cookie. Okay,
yeah.
So, I've already, I had him here 2 weeks ago. Chris Joy giving you the biggest rap on the planet. So you got a lot to live up to,
He's
mate.
a tough critic, Chris.
He's a very hard critic, actually. So you got a lot to live up to. What's the derivation of the name Mookhey?
So Mookhey is a Punjabi surname, and Punjab is the north of India, and Pakistan is the province that sits between the two. It's one of the two provinces that sits between the two. And so my family historically on my father's side are from what's now Pakistan. But when India and Pakistan were partitioned, my family ended up obviously in the Indian part.
So that was pre-47.
Yeah. That was 47, yeah.
Because India was a big country.
Yeah.
Bangladesh, Pakistan, India was all...
Subcontinent too. Yeah, what we now call the subcontinent was at that point called India, and obviously under British rule. My father was born in Lahore, which is and he was born 4 years prior to partition. And so when the country was then split, he had to move across as a refugee, bit before that, and same with my mum's side. My mum's side was born on what's now the Pakistani side of the Punjab, and ended up in India. But as well, so my Mookhey literally translates to village spokesperson, which for a politician is a good surname to have.
Was he a politician?
He was not. He wasn't. He was a geologist. He came out here as a geologist. But Mark, he was the first of his generation to get educated, and my grandfather was the third of 5 brothers, and his father could only afford to educate the first 2, not the third. So my grandfather worked as a stenographer, and he worked very hard. But then my father, as the eldest of the children, got to go to university, and then all the rest of them got to go to university as well in India.
In India.
And so my father comes, he trains as a geologist, and he gets recruited to come work on the Roxby Downs uranium project in the early 70s. And he's one of the first people who benefits from the final end of the White Australia policy, in which Australia started to welcome people more and more from the subcontinent and the rest of the world. So he swaps populated North India in the 70s for outback South Australia as a geologist. And then he makes his way over to Sydney as well. And then you would like this. His first job here, he ends up being a computer programmer and then a real estate agent. Then he gets into real estate.
But so he gave geology away.
Yeah. I mean, I guess from his perspective, rocks, I guess they have some fascination, but he decided that he wanted to move into a different career, and he ends up being effectively. I mean, back then, bear in mind, the mining industry wasn't as wealthy as perhaps it is these days.
Yeah.
So, but he ends up becoming a computer programmer, and then he goes into a real estate agent, and then he opens up a small business. But he passed away when I was very young. So he passed away when I was 5.
Oh, wow.
And so I didn't really get to know him that well. But he's the reason why we end up in Sydney. My mother, they get married in 75, and she comes out here too.
She's also from India?
Yeah, she's from the north of India as well. And so I'm raised by my widowed mother. I'm the youngest of 3 children, and we grew up in the western suburbs of Sydney.
But whereabouts in the west suburbs?
Marylands.
I'm
a Marylands boy. I was born in Blacktown.
Yeah.
Grew up in Marylands, very close to Parramatta, and that's home for me. When as a kid, and my family was there for 40 years.
And did you go to the local state school, or
I
you one of
did.
these
I did. I went
high
to
performing, whatever kids who used to
Well, I went to all of them actually. Like I went to Hilltop Road Public School which was a great public school, particularly at that age, particularly after my father died. Very supportive public school as well. And then I went to a comprehensive high school in the western suburbs, Model Farms High School, for 4 years, and then in years
What is that? What is a comprehensive high school?
meaning just your local school.
Right.
Like, yeah, your local public high school as well. And then I got into a selective school in year 11 and 12. And then I went to Girraween Selective School for people in Sydney who would know it. It's in Pendle Hill, out in the west as well.
And then when you were the youngest in your family, you're the youngest child.
I'm the youngest of
So you
3.
got brothers and sisters.
Yep.
Or brother and a sister.
Yeah.
Like perfect family, brother and a sister.
Yeah.
I never managed it. I ended up with 4 boys. And in terms of your mum, did she remarry or just
No.
continued on as a
She's a widow.
widower?
Yeah.
And it must have been a tough.
Well, she's an
time.
amazing woman. So she finds herself widowed on the other side of the world with 3 young kids. I was 5. My sister was 6. My brother was 11.
And her parents, no,
No,
the rest of the family's still back
India,
in Pakistan
yeah.
or India or.
yeah, India, all
Yeah,
India.
all in India.
Yeah, all there. My grandfather came out for a year. My uncle, my father's uncle, brother is in Sydney. They're the only other family we have here as well. But no, she was all by herself, and she went back to work. She went to work 4 weeks after my father passed, and spent her rest of her career as an accounts clerk. She was trained as a child psychologist, but her qualifications weren't recognised here. So she ends up as an accounts clerk. She goes back to TAFE. She retrains. She gets a job. She working in a manufacturing plant, doing it in the accounts department in Auburn. Then gets another job at Boral, and she's doing accounts for Boral which is where she stayed until she retired.
Is mum still alive?
Yeah,
Yeah, wow.
yeah. She's an amazing and very resilient woman, and I have to say, she put through 3 kids through schooling. We all got to go to university. My brother is an advanced programmer in quite a few complex IT languages. My sister's a lawyer. I'm obviously the treasurer of the state as well. We learned our work ethic from my mum. And I got to say, Mark, it's a very common story for immigrants.
Yeah.
You learn the ethic and you learn. And what's great about this country is that people don't really care where you come from. They care about what you do and what you can do and what you have to offer.
And how you go about it.
Yeah, and how you go about it. Yeah, and so she taught me basically you need to get educated, but you got to work hard, and no one's going to give you anything. You've got to work hard. But the other thing is the social obligation, right, as well.
And I'll come back to the social obligation in a second, because I think how we get brought up, or where we get brought up and how we get brought up, have a great impact on our sense of social obligation.
Yeah.
What would someone like you put down to some of your strengths as a result of observing, not being told, but observing how your mother lived her life and how your mother raised you, and observations that maybe inspired you, or you felt as though were tales that you must observe in terms of how you live your life as a young man?
Yeah, just watching your parent have to navigate that, particularly from a perspective of a very young eyes. This happened. My father passed away when I was 5, right? And what I really learned from my mum, just watching the way in which she handled it, and not just then, but throughout, resilience. Like, what she taught me really fundamentally was you need to be able to put one foot in front of another. That's really can be very hard at times.
Don't stop.
Don't stop. Yeah. And that's the first part. The other thing that incidentally that I really observed from my mother is dignity. How important it is for you to hold on to yours, but also how important it is for you to respect everybody else's dignity too, regardless of anyone's social station. You could be dealing with the richest person in the world or the poorest person in the world. Everyone's a human, and you've got to respect that dignity, and you've got to understand how crucial that is for people as well. Was the other thing I learned. And the third thing I really learned from my mum is, frankly, the importance of family. Like, we were a very, very, very tight-knit family. We still are. But how important that is for so many of us, and therefore, and the community that sits around it. And lots of immigrant communities, particularly when I was growing up. There weren't that many people from India in Australia, very different now. But just everyone was there for everybody else. And that importance of community and your obligations to each other really is the other lesson I picked up from my mum.
And does that somehow bleed into how you approach your politics?
Yep. That is I mean, where do you get your values and where do you get your principles? And the good politicians know the answer to that question. And where do I get my values and where do I get my principles? I get it from my experiences, and my experiences were that the importance of people being able to care for each other is a fundamental part of how I think I have to approach my job as well. But also, the point I was making about the dignity of people. You deal with lots of different people in politics, but you have to respect where everyone's coming from and treat everybody with respect when you agree with them and when you disagree with them.
So I've had people sort of come back to me and say, this guy's actually a Liberal, he's not actually a Labor Party guy. But that's quite interesting because whilst on one hand you have to respect and be, in your case, a little bit even responsible for people's dignity as a treasurer of the state and as a senior leader in the party that runs the state and has done for a while now and probably will do for quite a while in the future. You probably know that I am a big Chris Minns fan. So
he says hi.
He says hi, and I say hi back. But also you can make a decision as to which stream of that dignity and awareness and social impact that you're going to have, which stream of that in relation to the Labor Party that you sit.
Yeah.
So maybe you could explain perhaps the difference between, to our listeners, and most people don't know this, but the nuances within the Labor Party, like there is in the Liberal Party, by the way. There's some on the left, some on the right, some in the middle. Labor Party, some on the left, some on the right, some in the middle. Where does Daniel Mookhey sit in relation to that?
I mean, look, I've always been.
I don't want to be too rigid. I'm sorry about if it is.
No,
being rigid.
no, it's not. It's a great question.
Because you probably obviously, it seems to me like as someone come from your background, you respect enterprise.
Yeah, I do.
But at the same time, you want to look after those people who need to be looked after.
Yeah, I guess the way I would describe it is the type of, I'm from the part of the Labor Party, and I've always been attracted to the Labor Party in general. But the part of the Labor Party that I obviously am a part of is the part that I guess the Paul Keating, Bob Hawke, Bob Carr, Chris Minns part of the Labor Party, which is you do respect enterprise, and you respect enterprise because that is also what provides people with labour and therefore wages, and therefore gives them the economic power to make decisions for themselves. And for me, how did I get exposed to that? Again, it goes back to the product of my own childhood. So when I was growing up, Bob Hawke and Paul Keating were obviously in charge of the country at the time. And but I remember so vividly that when particularly I started to turn about 8, 9 is when Bob Hawke and Paul Keating, Bob Hawke's last election, about to get ready for Paul Keating's first, is when I start to pay a bit more attention to what's going on.
We're talking about the early 90s?
Early 90s, yeah. And that's the same time my family's going through a lot of hardship. The reason we got through it was because there was an excellent public school. And the reason why we got through it was because my mum could go to TAFE. And equally, she got a widow's pension that Bob Hawke brought in. And she got access to superannuation. And I remember quite vividly in 1990, in the recession we had to have, when there were redundancies going around, she held on to her job because the union stepped in to make sure that she could. And that's how I learnt my ethos too, and as well. But the lesson I drew out of that was that each of us needs the tools to succeed. And not everybody gets access to that by birth. And what's great about most don't, right? And what's great about this country is we've built a way which, again, you can be springboarded up, but also if something goes wrong, there's a safety net to catch you on the way down. And that's the sort of part of the Labor Party that I've always been most attracted to. And for me, my attitude has always been that the principles are very strong. How you apply them has to change. And I'm of the view that what works best for people is when, Labor and, frankly, enterprise work in partnership to the extent to which they can, and everyone gets to share in the prosperity. But also when things go wrong, everybody shares the risk.
Yeah, that's sort of like a little bit like the mandate of the Reserve Bank. It's about maintaining the prosperity and welfare of all Australians,
Yeah.
which is the words of their mandate. And welfare is just as important as prosperity.
Yeah.
You don't want too much prosperity at the cost of welfare, and you don't want too much welfare being doled out at the cost of prosperity.
But
it's this fine balance.
It comes down to hard work. And I'm from the part of the I guess what brings me to the Labor side of politics is that I think people should be rewarded for hard work. So do the Liberal Party, don't get me wrong. We just have different ideas as to how you do that.
Yeah.
And from my perspective, though, the work ethic is so crucial. And I just think also work gives people dignity, work gives people identity. I think it's so important. And I think it's why I'm from that part of the Labor Party that says, yep, if you work hard, you should get ahead.
So, okay, I've always had a view on work ethic. Not always. I've had a more mature view on work ethic of maybe the last 20 years compared to what I was when I was a kid, when I was a young man. When I was a young man, I took work ethic to mean the harder you work, the greater the reward. But as I've some time later, maybe over the last 20 years, I've realised that my work ethic is driven by the fact that I'm blessed that I can work.
Yeah.
And therefore, because I have that blessing, I should use it. And what I don't like is where I get sort of impeded. Something impedes my ability to use the thing that I've been blessed with. And what I mean by I can work, I'm physically able to get up early in the morning and do my reading and do whatever else I do. I was lucky enough to go through a university system, which I went through in those days was free. And in fact, I got given money to go to university because I got some sort of scholarships and things like that. But those things don't exist anymore, and I'm a big believer in those things. But I also think I owe my country for doing that for me. And I grew up in the west suburbs, not quite as far out as you, but I was Punchbowl.
You're a Punchbowl.
Punchbowl boy, yeah. I grew up in Punchbowl. I left there when I was 17.
Yeah.
Moved over to the eastern suburbs to go to uni. Can I ask you, when you obviously went to university, go back to your university days, when you were at university, were you thinking, and what did you do at university? And by the way, whatever it is you were doing, what were you thinking about Australians' welfare during that period?
Yeah, I got politicised quite young. When Bob Porketting lost, I started to pay a lot more attention to politics because I noticed 96, yeah. You start to notice the nation's changing, and then so I spent a lot of time then. I just started watching the news and starting reading the newspapers and really got into a lot of the public debate that was happening at the time. I, of course, was railing against John Howard every day. The irony, of course, Mark, is that teenage Daniel Mookhey hated John Howard and Peter Costello, but 43-year-old Daniel Mookhey goes, actually, I disagree with a lot of what they said and what they believed, but I respect their professionalism and I respect the way in which they approach the office. That's how. So my appetite for public debate was kind of whetted in that period of time. So when I went to university, I wanted to do two things. I wanted to do economics and I wanted to do law. And so I did undergraduate. I spent my time looking at economics. For what it's worth, I ended up immersing myself in the finer parts of Japanese monetary policy.
Wow. Which wasn't all that good.
Well, actually, at the time it wasn't. But all the work that effectively then Ben Bernanke unleashes on the world in 2008, quantitative easing, all pioneered by the Bank of Japan, 1998 to 2002. That's what I ended up spending a lot of time reading about. And then, so I did law, I did economics. And then
which university?
UTS. UTS.
Yep.
And then,
so that must have just become a uni at that stage, because
UTS was a university. It became a university in 86, 88.
Oh, really? Was that far back?
Yeah. That when John Dawkins converted them from
John Dawkins, wow.
the Polytechnical Institutes into universities. Yeah,
effectively. Well, by the way, University of New South Wales, I was one of the first students to be a university student because it was a tech. So I started in 73.
Yeah.
Gonna make a while. And it was a tech also.
Yeah.
But it became a university. And and by the way, great places to be when they became universities.
Yes. Yeah.
Because they actually were really enthusiastic about their students.
Ambitious, innovative.
Yeah. Unbelievable. Innovative and ambitious. Was fantastic. So you went through that process.
Yeah, I did.
Wow.
And then when I finished, I did a master's just for fun in defence studies. And so whilst I was working as a lawyer at a trade union, I just did a master's for defence studies because I was very interested in strategy.
Oh, that's no wonder Chris Joy loves you, because that's his defence policy and strategy is something that he's absolutely besotted with.
Yeah.
Albeit he's an economist, but he loves that.
Well, if you kind of look at strategy or defense and you look at economics, you start to see how the two meld. It's a good thing. It's a really good background to have. And sort of, I think from my perspective, I do think it gives you a lot more insight into how sort of particularly global markets are interacting at a state level.
Especially at the moment.
Yeah, especially right now.
Right, like right now.
Yeah.
It's critical. I just want to go. Did the Labor Party? Were you a member of the Labor Party, young Labor?
Yeah.
So you were a member of the Labor Party during that period.
My mum wouldn't let me join until I was
Really?
18, but when she did join, I signed up, and I remember when I went to my first Young Labor event. I think the third person I met is now the Premier of New South Wales.
Oh, really?
Yeah. We were all teenage Young Laborites, and so Chris Minns was there, as was a lot of now the senior cabinet as well. The Deputy Premier and I are also very similar age, and so she joined up as well. We started in the same year.
How is she, by the way?
She's getting better, yeah. But she's obviously going through a tough time right now.
Yeah.
But she's a real trooper.
Good on her.
the
I
Deputy
mean,
Premier,
I wish her my best. So when someone comes to you and says, or does someone come to you and say, identify you as a smart young lawyer or an economist, and one of the better students at the UTS, and say, we better get this kid into our gang? Well, you join when we were 18, but like, did someone sort of earmark you, or did you? Or was
I
more
guess,
you the other way?
Well, I certainly got in. I threw myself into it, like into the Labor Party and the Labor movement. But to be frank, back then I was far more interested in sort of the industrial relations side of the Labor movement.
As a lawyer, though?
Yeah, as a lawyer, yeah. I mean, Bill Kelty, the ACT, that era kind of meant I had a real interest in labour economics and sort of how people get treated at work.
One of the emperors of the Labor Party.
Yes.
And Bill, by the way, railing, and I should say this to you, Jim,
Yeah.
Bill is railing about what you're trying to do to superannuation, mate. Listen to Bill.
But anyway, so I got in, and then, I did actually. I had the opportunity just to generally as being a bit of a Labor Party activist and a Labor movement activist. Now Senator Tony Sheldon, he was at the head of the Truckers Union back then. And so he took a punt on me, and he hired me to work as his a summer intern, and when he was in charge of the Transport Workers Union. And I ended up at the airport talking to taxi drivers, food caterers, and then garbage workers, and then concrete carters, and small business, believe it or not. A hell of a lot of small businesses in transport are owner-drivers, and a lot of them are in the union. And so it was a great education. And so he took a punt on me, and he gave me my first job.
Did you apply for it, or he reached out?
I applied for it, but I knew him. And so I knew him, and also I had some friends who he was very good at mentoring a lot of young people. And so a lot of people, believe it or not, you'll see that have quite who've gone up to quite a lot of heights in the Labor Party and the Labor movement will trace their lineage to sort of, I guess, being mentored by Tony in the TWU. And they took a punt on me.
What do you learn from those experiences? So you've got your childhood experience with your mum and watching how hard work sort of pays off, and it's nearly a non-negotiable. And then you go off into the university, you do an economics law degree, you graduate, you're part of the Labor movement. You get luckily enough to get mentored by somebody, and you get exposure to the TWU. How does that form or refine your values and principles relative to being a politician?
Well, actually, two things. When you're people love unions or they hate unions. Like, people tend not to have an opinion in the middle. And I'll leave it to others to judge. But for me personally, what I learnt just by A, being there, and B, watching how Tony and a lot of the leadership there were handling it, was just how the stakes really matter for people. And so when you are asking a person who's a small business who has mortgaged their house,
might have a truck,
to buy a truck.
Yep.
And if something goes wrong with their business, they lose the truck, they lose their job, and they lose their house, and they have to explain it to their family. You start to learn that you have a duty of care. And so you learn very quickly that they're not hiring you and they're not paying their membership fees expecting you to be reckless. And what you learn is very quickly is that when you are having to negotiate pay and negotiate conditions, and yes, often a lot of conflict, that you are leading people. And the responsibility of leadership is also paired with the need to be caring, but also disciplined. And another really simple way of putting it is that if you're asking someone to go on strike, if you're asking someone to stop being on strike, you need to know why are you asking them to give up their pay, and also what are we fighting for, how are we going to get a resolution, and how we're going to make sure that the enterprise you're working with survives. One of the best pieces of advice I got there from a mentor at the union was, anyone can get their people to go on strike. It's getting them to go back in that's the hard bit. And when you're telling someone that they're not going to get paid, you better tell them why. And you better have a strategy, and you better know how you're going to get them what they want. And you also got to make sure that you're not risking their job in the long term. That's the sort of ethos you learn, and that's what I learned. And I got to say, the other thing is, when you're having to stand up at 4 a.m. at a kitchen at an airline that produces food for the airlines, you got to treat them with dignity. But I got to tell you that there's a no bullshit attitude out there.
It gives you perspective pretty
Yeah,
quick.
And I got to tell you, when you're talking to garbos at 4 a.m, 5 a.m, there's a no bullshit attitude towards it. And when you're talking to owner drivers at 6 p.m. at night who've come in for a meeting, who are negotiating a contract with one of the biggest firms, that literally their mortgage, their house, everything's on the line.
So that's what you mean by the stakes.
Yeah.
What's in it? Stakes being what am I staking? What am I potentially going to lose? And
that ethos is something for a politician is important, because you have a public trust.
As long as you've experienced it.
Yeah.
Not everyone does, but so when you look at that,
yeah,
and obviously this year and last year, this state has had a lot of issues around railway unions and all that sort of stuff. And do you? And I've seen a lot of commentary from you, and often I'm glad you told me this, because often I'm thinking to myself, Daniel's only looking at this from the point of view of what the economy can afford.
Yeah.
As opposed to, I think probably what you're going to now say to me is, but I also know what they're trying to do. I understand what's in it for them, why they're trying to improve their position. Do you get conflicted? And then when Chris says, "Look, mate, we have to make a call on this," and which you did, you guys made some really tough calls relative to the union's claims.
Yeah.
This year.
But look, the other way of putting it, Mark, is that you need to know how to fight for your beliefs, often against your friends as well. Don't get me wrong, I have great respect for the trade union movement. Does it mean I agree with them on everything? No. But also, as a Labor politician and a Labor treasurer who's been elected by the public, who holds a position on public trust, I always look for what's in the public's interest has to come first. And often you can find mutual interests with the people with whom you're negotiating. But that does mean, often you do feel conflicted, but I'm comfortable with it, because from my perspective, people deserve a train. And we need
people as in consumers.
Consumers, yeah. Yep. And that's what our job as a government is, to deliver their essential services. And that often does mean, you've got to have some tough conversations with your workforce, respectful conversations with your workforce, and you have to be looking for a solution at all times. Don't get me wrong. But often that does mean you have to say no, and I'm comfortable with that.
Because I've thought about, I've heard you and listened to you and watched and thought about Chris as well, and especially when they're being interviewed, etc., about some of those conflicts, particularly during the transport blue that was happening, I don't know, 6 months ago, whatever it was, and it went on for about maybe a year. I used to think to myself, how does someone like Daniel balance off with what the state can afford? Do you have to sit down and think to yourself, well, this could cause a cascade of claims amongst others, and we as a government who have to pay these wages relative to the services being provided to the consumers. Do you sit down and say, we just can't afford this?
Yeah, I do.
And often, when you say the unions, how do they respond?
Well, often they disagree.
And they say you can afford it though, or you should afford
it. Both. They will obviously make both points, and that's their job.
Yeah.
I get that. That's their job.
Yeah.
Their job is to argue hard. But my job is also to argue hard, and you often do find yourself where you just can't agree. And that does often lead to industrial action, which you then have to be resolved. Right?
And a few times you went to the Fair Work Commission and got rulings.
Yeah.
Which I thought was good.
Yeah. But Mark, you can't duck the hard calls. The other way of putting it is that no one elects governments to make easy decisions. You have to make hard decisions, and if you expect to be in government making simply easy calls, you won't. That's just not tenable. So from my perspective, you're quite right. Often I have to say, state can't afford it, And particularly when we came to power, we inherited a $10 billion deficit from the Liberal Party and those who came before us, and a very sharp rise in spending and a very large increase in debt. And so from my perspective, the way through is just to tell people the truth. We can't afford it. But I should also make the point, from my perspective, the reason why I was happy and comfortable enough into having to have these conversations is because what we were offering was also fair. And it wasn't like we were saying there's a wage freeze. It's not like
I'm
we
not
were
going to give you
asking
nothing.
people a pay cut.
Yeah.
We weren't saying that.
Yeah.
We've been saying to people along. In fact, we've been able to show people that we've delivered New South Wales police officers the best pay rise in a generation, a once-in-a-decade pay rise, incidentally paid for by reform, by fixing a police insurance scheme that was broken. So from my perspective, you can have those conversations if you're offering people the truth and you're offering them fairness. And if they reject it, they reject it. That doesn't mean we have to agree.
So it's interesting that your position in relation to, being put into conflict is something you're quite comfortable with. And you made the very good point, and it's a point I wish all governments in Australia would adopt, is that you will be put in conflict and you're not there to please everybody, and you've got to do something which is going to make someone unhappy.
Yeah.
And that's a pretty ballsy position to be prepared to take, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
And that's a pretty big call to make. Why is it that you guys do it, you and Mins and the rest of your team, make those calls, and perhaps you may not want to even comment on it, but perhaps others find it less palatable to be able to make those calls?
Oh, I mean, look, I think lots of people are making very hard decisions right now. The nation and the state's coming out of some pretty tough times, and there are hard decisions that need to be made, and you can't please everybody, that's for sure, and everybody approaches it from a very different perspective. I guess what I would say, though, is that it's a credit to Chris in the way he leads the government and the mandate he got and the party got when we were elected 2 years ago. We were elected to help solve the state's problems, and particularly to make sure that people have good jobs, they can afford to live in the city, they have a roof over their head, and they've got great services in their neighbourhoods. That's a really cool why we were here. And we've been pretty upfront that we'll be candid about what goes well. We'll also talk about what needs to be done better. And yeah, we weren't elected to duck the easy decisions, the hard decisions. We were elected to make them. And so from my perspective, I can't really answer your question other than to say that's the ethos that we bring, and it does mean, we are making some pretty tough calls, but it's leading to better results for people in New South Wales. I mean, we were in a pretty tough fight in the first year when we got here with the teachers, but we managed to land that in a scenario which delivered teachers a great pay rise. But why is that good for the people in New South Wales? Because today we have nearly halve the number of cancelled and merged classes in public schools in New South Wales, which more kids are getting more access to more teachers. We've got more kids getting access to tutoring. So from my perspective, the reason why we make the calls is because we know it leads to better outcomes for the people of New South Wales and the people we were elected to serve. And so there's no way to avoid it. If you want change, at times you have to disappoint people, but you've got to tell people about why you're doing it. You've got to be straight with what you're expecting to flow, and then you've got to be accountable for the decisions you make.
So because you've gone through teachers, nurses and transport.
Yeah.
They're the three big ones. Is there anything else?
Yeah, well, I mean, look, there's a lot.
Obviously police. But police weren't giving you trouble. I mean, there was no strike or whatever, or maybe there was, we didn't know about it. But those three are the sort of the standout ones. And I thought you held your ground every time.
Yeah.
And so did your leader, your premier. How's that relationship? I mean, you explained to us how you first met, but how did that relationship come about when when the party was formed and was running for government? How did your relationship potentially as the treasurer become a reality?
Well, I mean,
with the premier, is that how it works? So the premier appoint the treasurer? How does it work?
He does. Yeah. So I mean, he's obviously elected as a leader of the party, and he allocates the jobs to everybody else. So he's the one who makes the call as to who gets to do what. Obviously, the deputy premier gets a pretty big say in choosing what she wants to do.
Yep.
So Chris got elected leader of the Labor Party when the Labor Party was in real trouble, actually, and was out of power for about 10 years here in New South Wales.
Yeah, and you had a lot of legacy crap you had to deal with.
Yeah.
The obeds, etc. All
Yeah.
that drama.
Yeah, but he got elected as frankly, a new generation. Like, none of us were around at that point in time with all the legacy issues with the Abid and all that. And so he set up a very good ethos amongst the leadership team and the people who lead the New South Wales government. It's very collaborative. It's very consensus driven.
I would call it modern.
Yeah, it's very modern. It doesn't,
Younger people sort of running it.
It's very very respectful of it. So from his perspective, like he sets obviously the tone. But obviously, it's a huge privilege to be a treasurer of the state and to be a treasurer in any other government. I have to say, as treasurers are only as effective as their premiers will let them be, and I'm very fortunate that I have a very good relationship with the premier as well, and he is a very collaborative leader to work with, which means that we can make tough decisions. We do it as a team.
So. You were talking about, the sort of some of the tough decisions, sort of your tactical stuff. I'm dealing with the transport. I'm dealing with this issue, dealing with that issue. They're the day-to-day bushfires. You've got to be put out, and that's their hard calls every day.
Yeah,
probably many times per day, every day. But then we can talk about the strategic stuff. One of the things I want to talk to you about today is your budget. You've just released your budget, and they're your strategy. That's New South Wales economic strategy for the start of the next 12 months. You've just released it. I saw that. You took a fairly, what I would call economically pragmatic position. You're looking to build surpluses.
Yep.
Different to a lot of other governments.
Yeah. Eye on the prize here, Mark, as well. You have to deal with a lot of tactical issues, and state politics issues erupt every day.
Yeah.
But you've got to keep your eyes on the prize, right?
Yeah.
Why are we here? What do we want to do?
Correct.
And so when we were framing the budget, knowing that there's really three very important things we have to do for the New South Wales' future. First, make sure people get a home.
Yeah.
And we are dealing with a housing crisis. We have to make sure we keep building more homes for people to live. We can't duck the fact that we just haven't been building enough homes here in New South Wales. We need to build, and we need to build. And so we did a lot of our settings were designed to make sure that we were intervening in some markets, working with the private sector to really get more homes built in New South Wales and to give the private sector a lot of confidence to say yes to those investment cases. Why is that important? Because go back to the sort of where we started. If you happen to be a family in a circumstance similar to mine and yours, be it in Punchbowl or be it in Maryland's, if you don't get access to a good home, you don't get anything else. And if you haven't got housing security, your capacity to get an education is diminished. Your capacity to convert your work into wealth, harder, very hard. So we want to get more of that done. The second thing we have to do is, we had to do a lot of fiscal repair. At a time where interest rates have been high, inflation has been high, we've been very conscious that if we simply pour more fuel on the fire, who ends up paying it? It's frankly people with mortgages. And so in my first budget, in our second budget, we were pretty determined to get our expense growth under control and to
government
expense growth. Yeah. When I came to power and into this office, and the government came to power, I should say, the New South Wales expenses were growing at roughly 24% a year the previous year, on average 6.4% over the previous 5 years. Not sustainable at a time of high inflation. It's had to come down. And so we have actually been able to report that we've brought that down to now about 2.4%. The other thing I should just say is the debt has to be stabilised and brought down. And I'm really pleased that by the end of this financial year that's just started, we're on track to have about $10 billion lower debt than we would have had under our predecessors as well. And why is that important? Because everyone who's paying attention to markets right now knows they're in a lot of uncertainty. And if you happen to be in the bond market or exposed to the bond market, which I know a lot of your listeners would pay a lot of attention to, it's in a lot of state of flux. And so us being able to show that we're the only state that actually cut its forecast for issuance after the budgets, I think it's really important.
I thought it was a big deal too, by the way. I mean, probably slipped by a lot of people, but that's a big call.
Yeah. I
mean, strategically, for a Labor Party, it's not something I would not ordinarily expect to happen. I actually thought it was very brave, very courageous, great call. How do you look at that in relation to maybe what their rating agencies are thinking?
Well, I'm thinking about where are we going as a state and what do we need, right? And so the rating agencies have been clear from the moment I became treasurer. The credit rating is at a real risk. Has been for
and a privilege.
Yeah, it's a privilege.
Ours is a privilege.
Yeah,
New South Wales, I should say, and federally.
Yep. So we've been conscious of it for a while. The rating agencies are going to have to make their own minds up. But put it this way: after the budget we gave just last week, our metrics are better. Debt is stable as a percentage of GSP, and the only state that's showing it coming down as well. It's a lot lower than otherwise thinks. We are literally going to the bond market and asking for less money today than people were expecting us to 2 weeks ago. So from my perspective, I think it's a really important signal to send that here in New South Wales, the finances are stabilising. Is the job done? No, obviously it's not done. But I'm really pleased that we are now able to show that there is a pathway back to surplus. A lot needs to go right. I'm very cautious about it. I'm not doing any victory laps whatsoever. I mean, I remember when I gave my first budget, we had a pathway to surplus. Then the very next year, New South Wales got hit with a massive reduction in GST income. We had $12 billion taken off us. This year, we've been able to show people that we're getting on with our job, but we are stabilising the state's finances as well.
With 12 billion less.
Yeah, we lost 12 billion in revenue last year in GST. The biggest hit to New South Wales revenue in decades. The last year's Commonwealth Grants decision on the GST breakup between the states, and every year the way I should just explain it is that the Commonwealth Grants Commission, independent body, sits federally, tells every state what you're going to get. We lost a lot of money. We lost more money from their decision than we did during COVID. So a big hit to the finances, which obviously is my job to manage as a treasurer.
Did you get a chance to argue it?
No, you make your case, but it's pretty opaque. Put it this way, I could not explain to your listeners how they carve it up. Couldn't do it. So it's such a weird way in which to allocate
It's
money.
about contribution. I don't understand it. Like it's about. It can't be about numbers of people.
Well, it's a bit about numbers of people, and it's a bit about how much they think it costs to deliver services in your state. But
if you're doing a really good job delivering services in the state, or is it their services they deliver in your state?
No, it's us.
So if you're doing a really good job at it,
you often can lose money.
So that's counterintuitive to me.
I know.
You should be getting rewarded for it.
Well, there you go. If lo and behold, if they kind of think that perhaps that you're more, I guess, in one view, efficient, the conclusion is
you need less.
You need less. Yeah. So it's a weird system, right? And Mark, I'm not being cute in saying this. We could be here for the next 2 hours, and I'm still not sure I'd be able to shed much light in how it works, other than to say it's wildly unpredictable. And it's certainly, from my perspective, if you can't understand it, people won't support it, and I think we can do better as a nation in fixing it.
So last year you 12 billion down.
Yep.
In terms of allocation from the GST.
And that's a big part of every state's budget.
Yeah, and that's right. And so as a result of that, for this budget, you had to go about and make sure you cut the cloth to suit.
Yep.
And start to reduce costs.
Yep. We've had to
making an assumption that it's not going to increase for some.
Well, basically, we had to keep cost growth down. We haven't been sort of having to because a lot of the work we did in our first budget, we were able to absorb the impact. But it just means we've had to keep ourselves in a very disciplined posture, and it means that you have to say no to a lot of things as treasurer. A lot of things that have a lot of merit. But again, Mark, every business and every household has to do the same thing.
Yeah,
it's not like
we do it all the time.
You have to do it all the time, and so for governments as well, it's important. The other thing I'd sort of say is why I think it's important for the economy writ large is that we need to get more private sector growth happening. This is a conversation the nation's having. I agree very much with the federal government when they say that the next era of Australian growth is going to need to be led by the private sector. But for us, what that means is by showing that we're stabilising our finances here in New South Wales, it's giving the private sector a lot more confidence to go, okay, we want to invest more in this state, and the state's open for business.
So one of the initiatives, now, forgive me if I got this not quite right, but one of the initiatives that you're talking about is in relation to, probably the wrong word to use, but sort of underwriting developers.
Yeah, pre-sale finance guarantee. Yeah.
So, because that's an important one. So it's not only about housing affordability or housing supply, I should say, but correct me if I'm wrong. Is that because, apart from, first home rental grant and all those sorts of things, at the end of the day, housing supply is not from the government, it's from the developers.
Yep.
And you've got to make it such that they can borrow money.
Yep.
And if they can't borrow, and usually they borrow money from banks, sometimes from private lenders, but usually from banks. And the banks have a fairly strict regime, which they're made to have through the regulator.
Yep.
That they have pre-sales and they'll only lend up to a certain percentage of the total development costs, etc. Was that something you guys sat around and unpicked and worked out? This is something we have to in New South Wales address.
Yes.
So maybe can you just explain what it is you did?
Yeah,
you've launched.
So it is it's what I would describe as a canny use of the government's balance sheet. Careful, very, very careful use, but canny use. And it comes from this. You sit in talking to people about what's stopping them from getting going on construction.
So they own the land out at Camden or wherever it is. Got a couple of thousand acres. Could put 10,000 houses on there.
Yeah.
But they're not doing it. They're just land banking it.
Yeah. Or alternatively, actually, they've got approval to build some apartments near railway stations in neighbourhoods people love to live in.
Yep.
And they need to go and convince their lenders, banks, financiers, private credit, that there's enough buyers. Often what they're being told is you need to have 80% of the stock
Pre-sold. Committed.
Yep. You need to show us that you have 80% sold.
Yep.
What we've said is, well, actually, if you're building at that level, those sort of mid-tier apartments in these neighbourhoods, which everyone's telling me are the most challenging projects to get feasibility approval on.
So we're talking about $1 billion development?
$1 billion, it can be up to $1 billion, but equally, we're talking about, for example, the 3 to 9 story apartments, particularly that mid-tier in areas that are already built up.
And in zones where you would like to see more development relative to, say, transport.
Yeah, where we've already got transport, where we've got schools, where we've got water, where you're ready to go. Like the neighbourhoods can absorb a bit more housing. And also there's lots of people who are renting in these suburbs who are looking for a place to buy, right? Yep. And so it's the first step on the housing ladder, is the other way of putting it. But just by talking to those people who are doing that, they all of them were saying, well, these are the most challenging projects to get. We get to 50% sales, but the banks want 80. If you step in and just go, you'll buy some of them. Like you're prepared to buy it.
You, the government.
You, the government, will buy some of them.
As a buyer of last resort, so to speak. Not last resort, but underwrite the buying.
Underwrite the buying, right? You just, that gap, that gap. That's enough for us to then unlock the money and get the construction going.
That's enough to convince the banks or the lenders that, well, in fact, the banks and lenders are going to say, well, wow, that's the government. So AAA rated government. That's not bad. That's a good enhancement.
And for the people in New South Wales, right, what's the worst outcome we get? We get a house.
Yeah.
We buy the house.
You, the state government, have a house.
We end up getting the house.
Yeah.
And we get the house and we can then use it for social housing or affordable housing, or we'll sell it ourselves in the event that happens. So it's a pretty canny use of the sort of state's balance sheet. We say, all right, well, we're prepared to go as a buyer and underwrite the buy and that gap. That means we can bring forward roughly 15,000 additional private sector dwellings, which is not a silver bullet, but there's no one policy that's a silver bullet. It's how they all work with each other. And what that means is that, we are building more homes for people to buy and for people to rent at relatively low risk for the state of New South Wales, which is what we need to do if we're serious about getting the housing crisis built. But your broader point is right, Mark. The housing crisis will be solved by the private sector building more homes.
Yeah. Only way.
And we're doing our bit. And when it comes to social housing, we're doing our bit when it comes to essential worker housing. But ultimately, we need all of the above. We need an all of the above solution. And the way I put it is, we need more homes for social housing. We need more affordable homes. We need more homes for our essential workers. We need more homes for people to buy and rent. We need more homes. And so from our perspective, the Premier's made it very clear as a government, this is a core mission to us. And so we're doing what we need to do to make sure that people have a roof over their head.
I have heard some people criticise all governments, but in particular the New South Wales government as well, because your contribution towards the 1.2 million houses over the next now 4 years, which is what was the federal government's sort of discussion about a year or so ago. You won't make it. Probably you won't make it. But I think the point being here is, from your point of view at least, in relation to this budget, is this is a start. I mean, you can't just say, oh, no, we're not going to make it. Probably you won't make it. But that doesn't mean I can't do anything. I've got to try and make it. So just if you could just explain to me, where does that, it's called a credit enhancement. What you've actually done, you've enhanced the credit of the builder relative to the lender, for the lender to grant the builder, the developer, the money to do the development. Okay, I don't think I've ever seen a government put their balance sheet up effectively by underwriting that enhancement, which is pretty typical of what lenders want to see relative to a developer. Where does that idea come from? Like, do you talk to credit providers? Do you go out and talk to well-known builders and say, mate, what is it that you need to allow you to get this project up and running?
Yes, we do. And that's what good governments do. They listen. And credit to the Planning Minister, Paul Scully, here in New South Wales and his department, that's been at the front lines of all these conversations. And in fact, how did this policy come about? we were having these conversations 2 years ago with what do we need to do, what's stopping people. And Paul, last budget, a very quiet announcement we did, the two of us did on a Saturday morning, in which we said, all right, we're going to put aside a bit of money to look at this. And not big amounts of money, but enough money for us to then start getting in, do the proper policy work that's designed. And then Paul and his team have driven it since. And as Treasurer, of course, when it comes to the use of the balance sheet, the Treasurer has to be comfortable. And we had a real look at it. We got in there, had to do a lot of due diligence. And we spoke to a lot of people in industry, spoke to a lot of people in the banks. What stops you? And yes, because we were doing that listening, we were able to come up with this nation-leading scheme, which we will hopefully bring forward about 15,000 dwellings in the next sort of few years. So from our perspective, that's what governments need to do. And frankly, here in New South Wales, we're unabashed about the fact that we will listen to anyone who's got a good idea, be it from a business, be it a union, be it an industry group. If we want to solve the housing crisis, we're all going to have to work with each other.
Yeah, and I just think it's a great example for other states to consider. I mean, and I guess that's what leadership's all about. Taking a risk. You are taking a risk, but based on, as you said, due diligence. I mean, you at the end of the day, if the worst comes to worst, you end up owning a house.
But Mark, the other point is this: doing nothing is risky.
Yeah, 100%.
Like doing nothing risks locking out an entire generation from the prospect of ever owning a home. And that doing nothing is to risk us losing our egalitarian ethos, which says no matter where you come from, you can get ahead and you can own and you can build your wealth here in this state and in this country. So from my perspective, the status quo is risky. And yep, you've got to be very careful when you're using the state's balance sheet. Don't get me wrong, but from my perspective, we're trying to solve a challenge and a pretty immense challenge of it, and we need to make some progress just in order to make sure that we can hold on to what we have here. So from our perspective, we should be listening. And yep, we should be working in partnership with everybody, workers, unions, business, industry, to get more homes built for people.
I mean, I just think for me, it's one of the best initiatives I've seen for a government to do, state or federal, for a long, long time, being prepared to step in and use their balance sheet in order to get a really important outcome, that is housing, more housing, more housing, more housing. Treasurer, just to finalise this thing off, finalise our conversation off, what are some of the highlights that you'd like to point out in relation to your latest budget?
Yeah, I mean, there's one thing that I'm really proud of that we did in this budget, which is we delivered the biggest increase to child protection in New South Wales history.
Wow.
And these are for kids who it's not safe for them to stay at home. These are for kids who need to be looked after by the government and foster carers and a lot of our charities and not-for-profits. We, in this budget, made a $1.2 billion investment in better child protection, and equally delivered the first increase in the foster carers allowance in real terms for 20 years. And for those people who are caring for kids who are not their own, it's really important that they can afford to do so. So I'm really pleased about that. And why I'm also really proud about that is because the way in which we paid for it wasn't just simply to throw more money at it. We actually fixed a lot of the problems that we were dealing with in child protection, that we started this work in year one. Mark, I mean, I guess when we got sworn in, when Chris became Premier, I became Treasurer, and Kate Washington became the Minister responsible for this here in New South Wales, we had 100 kids on average a night sleeping in motels.
And I can't believe that. I mean, I got a shock by it.
Yeah, 100 odd kids every night. For the 2 years of really hard work and reform behind the scenes meant that as of April this year, no kids were sleeping in motels. And just to put that in really numeric terms, a kid sleeping in that type of arrangement per year costs roughly $1 million. $1 million. Because we had so many of them, this was not a good use of public money, and it wasn't leading to a good outcome for the kids. But because we've been fixing that for 2 years, we now have that money to then redeploy into a much better system. And I'm really proud of that, because that's a lot of hard work that our government has done, and our Minister has led, and the Premier and us as a team have delivered. But that's the type of stuff that reminds you about why you're in this job.
And anything else you want to throw out there, highlight in relation to your budget?
Yeah, the other thing I'm really proud of as well with this particular budget is, again, we are showing people that we are making investments in the things that they care about. At the same time, we're stabilising the finances.
Treasurer, I know you got a lunch you got to go and attend, and I'm getting wound up by my crew over the side here. But I really appreciate you coming in there.
Thank you. Yeah.
And Chris, everything you said about him, he's lived up to it, mate.
That's a great chat. Thanks, mate.